I have told this story exactly twice in my life. The first time was to the sector tribunal under oath, stylus recorder running, and 3 senior adjudicators watching my hands for signs of distress fabrication. The second time was to my daughter, the night before she left for the Outer Survey Academy, because I wanted her to understand something about the shape of the galaxy that no instructor there would ever think to teach her. She asked me afterward whether I had been afraid. I told her, not of the thing I should have been afraid of. That answer confused her, so I will try to be more precise here, for anyone who finds this account in whatever archive it eventually settles into. I was sector keeper 3rd grade aboard the colony vessel Varanth Crossing on the day I am about to describe. My station was the secondary comms array on Deck 4, which is a polite way of saying I sat in a closet behind the primary communications suite and monitored the bands that the senior operators considered too routine to watch themselves. Gravitational anomaly traffic, buoy pings, passive survey returns, the frequencies that nobody interesting ever used. I was very good at my job. I had been very good at it for 11 years. I was also, on that particular morning, deeply professionally bored. That is the honest beginning. The Varanth Crossing was a 2nd-generation colony resupply vessel, which means she was large enough to feel permanent, but old enough to feel unreliable. She carried 4,000 colonists in rotating shift habitation, 6,000 tons of structural material for the Veth Core expansion platform, and a hull that her chief engineer, a woman named Osavar Teln, described privately as held together by institutional stubbornness and the fear of paperwork. I liked Osavar. She was not wrong about the hull. We were 3 days out from the core way station on a standard resupply run, which is to say, we were in the deep transit lane between the Veth home systems and the outer colonization arc, a stretch of space that is featureless enough that the nav charts mark it with nothing more than distance indicators. And a cautionary note about gravitational variance near the Kethis Fold. The fold is a region of compressed spacetime left over from some ancient stellar event that the Veth Science Directorate has been studying inconclusively for the better part of 2 centuries. It does not threaten navigation. It does, however, play irregular games with signal propagation, which is why secondary comms operators like me existed. Someone had to sit in the closet and watch the bands go strange. On the morning in question, the bands were doing something I had not seen in 11 years of watching them. I noticed it the way you notice a wrong note in a familiar piece of music. Not with alarm at first, with the specific discomfort of a thing that does not fit. 2 signals, arriving at nearly identical timestamps, on frequencies that should have been separated by 17 standard channel widths. One was a Vathic emergency pulse, the tight-coded distress format that colony vessels use when they need help from other Vathic ships. I recognized the carrier wave immediately. I had drilled on it hundreds of times and never heard it in the field. The other was something I had to look up. An RN patrol band emergency burst, the kind of compressed distress code that the RN Defense Compact uses for its frontier frigates, when a situation has moved beyond the frigate's ability to manage alone. Neither signal was mine to receive. The Vathic pulse was almost certainly from another vessel somewhere in the transit lane, a misfire, a drill, a genuine emergency that the primary relay would handle. The RN burst was stranger. The RN did not operate this far into the transit lane. Their patrol boundaries ran along the outer arc, 3 days' travel from my current position. That burst should not have been reachable from here. The Kethis Fold, I noted in my log, was apparently in one of its more creative moods. What happened next was a thing I have since had explained to me by 3 separate signal navigation physicists, each of whom used different terminology and reached the same conclusion. The 2 signals, arriving simultaneously from different vectors, had been bent by the fold's gravitational variance and had intersected at almost exactly the point where my secondary array happened to be sitting. When 2 emergency signals on overlapping frequencies intersect at high enough signal density, standard encoding protocols do something automatic and not entirely intentional. They merge. The content of each signal is preserved, but the combined burst is rebroadcast on whatever frequencies happen to be resonant at the intersection point, which in this case included 3 bands that the Vaithic array uses internally, and incidentally, 1 frequency that I did not recognize at all. I logged all of this very carefully. Then, I flagged the primary suite. Senior Operator Vethar Dunn took my report with the expression of a person who has worked with junior operators for long enough to have developed a productive skepticism. He listened. He checked my logs. He ran a verification scan. Then he looked at me with an expression that had shifted from skepticism to something more cautious. "The merged burst," he said. "What frequency did it rebroadcast on?" I showed him. He was quiet for a moment. "That is a human emergency reception band," he said. "Yes," I said. "We are not in human space." "No," I said, "but the Kethis Fold does not appear to have strong opinions about that." He stared at the readout for another few seconds. Then he said, "Log it. Flag it to navigation. Keep watching." I kept watching. The Vaithic emergency pulse, we learned within the hour, had come from the agricultural transport Kessenveld, which was running parallel to us in the transit lane, approximately 40 minutes behind our position. She had suffered a catastrophic coolant failure in her secondary drive manifold. Not, I want to be clear, the kind of heroic engineering sacrifice that gets commemorated in station murals, but the kind of slow, expensive, thoroughly undramatic failure that happens when a component that should have been replaced 6 maintenance cycles ago finally makes its opinion known. The Kessenveld was not in immediate danger of hull loss, but she had lost maneuvering capability and was drifting toward the near edge of the folds. Gravitational influence, which was not a place you wanted to drift with a compromised drive system. The Aren burst was harder to trace. It took our navigation officer, a meticulous individual named Farron Osk, the better part of 2 hours to reconstruct the signal's original vector from the fold's distortion signature. When she finished, she came to find me personally, which she had never done before in the 3 years we had worked adjacent shifts together. "The Aren signal," she said, without preamble, originated from a position approximately 2 light days into the outer patrol boundary, beyond the standard transit lane. "That is consistent with an Aren patrol frigate running frontier coverage," I said. "Yes," she said. "The signal encoding identifies the vessel as the Aren frigate Kethis Watch 4. She is reporting a structural compromise following an encounter with a gravitational wave front, likely an ejected pulse from the fold. She has lost primary propulsion. She has casualties. She is requesting assistance from the Aren Compact Patrol Command." I looked at Farron Osk. Farron Osk looked at me. "The Aren Compact Patrol Command," I said carefully, "received that signal through the normal relay network." "Yes," Farron said. "The Kethis Watch 4's signal went where it was supposed to go. And also," I said, "through the fold's intersection point, it went somewhere else." "To our secondary array," she said, "and to whatever happened to be listening on the human emergency reception band at the time of intersection." I sat with that for a moment. "The human emergency reception band has a passive listening range of approximately 8 light hours in standard conditions," Farron said. "The fold's propagation amplification is not standard conditions." She paused. I ran the numbers twice. "How far did it carry?" she told me. I sat with that for a considerably longer moment. There's a particular quality to the silence that settles over a communication station when the operator has just confirmed something that has no clean category. It is not the silence of alarm. Alarm is loud. Alarm has procedures and checklists and people moving quickly. This was the other kind of silence. The kind that comes when you have logged a fact carefully and correctly, and then looked up from your log and realized that the fact is going to require decisions that nobody in your chain of command has ever had to make before. I wrote my log entry. I flagged it to Senior Operator Vethar Dunn. Vethar Dunn flagged it to the duty captain, a steady, unhurried individual named Captain Vareth Solon, who had the quality I most admire in commanders, which is the ability to receive improbable information without visibly falling apart. Captain Solon read my report. She read it again. She asked me 3 precise technical questions about the propagation model, which I answered as accurately as I could. Then she said, "So there is a possibility that a human vessel may have received the blended burst." "Yes, Captain." "And the blended burst contained both the Kessenveld's distress encoding and the Kethis Watch 4's distress encoding." "Yes, Captain." fused into a single signal on a human emergency reception frequency. Yes, Captain. She was quiet for a moment. This Watch 4 is an RN patrol vessel. Their compact patrol command has their signal. Yes, Captain. The Kessenveld is our concern. We are already coordinating response with the waystation relay. Yes, Captain. So the human reception of this signal is, in practical terms, a navigation anomaly, an artifact of the fold. Nothing actionable, I said. Yes, Captain. Then I said, although, she looked at me. Captain Solon had the very specific look of a person who knows that the word although from a junior operator is about to make her morning more complicated. The Kethis Watch 4, I said, is reporting casualties and total propulsion loss in a region where AREN compact response time, if Troll Command dispatches immediately, is approximately 9 standard days. Their life support reserves, based on the signal's embedded status codes, are rated for 11 days at current crew count. I paused. If there are casualties that have reduced the active crew count, life support duration extends. But the structural compromise she reported suggests her hull integrity may not hold for the full 11 days regardless. Captain Solon looked at the display for a very long time. The human vessel, she said. It received the signal, and if it is on an intersecting route, and if it chose to respond, what would its response time be? I don't know, I said. I don't know where a human vessel would have been positioned to receive the signal. I don't know if any human vessel was in range at all. Propagation amplification makes the math imprecise, but possible. Yes, Captain, possible. She nodded once. The way she nodded when she had a decision she did not particularly enjoy making. Log it. Flag it to the waystation with a full propagation report. Let the Compact Patrol Command know what happened with their signal. And keep watching. I kept watching. 6 hours later, a vessel appeared on the edge of our long-range passive scan. I want to be specific about what appeared means here because the word makes it sound more dramatic than it was. Passive scan at that range returns a contact that is mostly noise with a slight mass signature anomaly. A smudge, essentially. A smudge that moved with purpose. A smudge that was decelerating. Ships that are simply passing through a transit lane do not decelerate. I flagged Vether Done. Vether Done ran an active return. The active return came back with a configuration profile that matched no Vathic vessel, class, no AREN vessel class, and no Coalition standard hull type in our recognition library. The recognition library offered, after a 4-second processing pause that felt much longer, a low confidence match to a human survey corvette configuration. Low confidence. The library's human vessel database was not comprehensive. We were not a military vessel and did not carry military-grade recognition files. The profile was consistent. A single hull configuration, roughly 400 meters, with an emission signature that matched human fusion drive technology. One ship, decelerating into our transit lane. I sent the contact report to Captain Solon. Captain Solon came to the communications deck personally, told me something about how she was waiting this. She stood next to my station and looked at the display with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, not alarmed, not hurried, just completely and carefully present. One vessel, she said. Yes, Captain. Survey configuration if the library match holds. Low confidence match but consistent. Not a warship, no. The emission profile is wrong for a warship. Drive signature is too light. Power output too modest. If the library match is accurate, this is a survey or patrol type. Lightly armed at most. She was quiet. On the display, the smudge continued its deliberate deceleration. Passing through, she said. No, Captain, they've received the signal. It was not a question. I answered it anyway. That would be my assessment, Captain. Yes. She watched the display for another moment. Then she said, particular flatness of someone who has accepted a fact and is now simply managing its implications. Get me a channel. Frequency they're likely to monitor for first contact. I had, in fact, already looked this up. I am a good comms operator. The response to our hail came 7 minutes later, which was consistent with a vessel at that range and in that deceleration profile. It was a voice channel. The human operator had matched our signal format precisely, which suggested either very good equipment or very experienced signals personnel or both. The voice was unhurried. A woman's voice. She spoke in standard Galactic common with a slight accent I could not place. Varanth Crossing, this is ECS Hadlow. Survey Corvette, out, of Earth's Outer Cartographic Service. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Vance commanding. We received a composite distress signal on emergency reception band approximately 6 hours ago. Signal appeared to encode 2 separate emergencies. We are on approach to render assistance if needed. Please advise on your current status and the nature of the second encoded signal. To Captain Solon. Captain Solon looked at the channel indicator for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "Respond." I responded. What followed was a conversation that I have transcribed in full in the Sector Tribunal record, and will not reproduce entirely here. Practical substance was this. The Hadlow had been running a cartographic survey pass along the outer edge of the Transat lane, a route that brought her, coincidentally within the fold's amplified propagation radius at the precise moment the 2 signals merged and rebroadcast. Signals officer had flagged the composite burst immediately. Lieutenant Commander Vance had spent approximately 40 minutes verifying that the signal was genuine and not a fold artifact, then another 20 minutes in consultation with her senior staff, and then had altered course and begun her deceleration. She had not consulted with Earth's Outer Cartographic Service Command before altering course. I know this because I asked her carefully if she had authorization to respond to distress calls outside her survey mandate. She was quiet for a moment before she answered. Then she said, "The mandate is to observe and record. Responding to a distress call is a different category. We made a judgment." I noted this for the tribunal record without comment. It was not my judgment to evaluate. What she said next is the part I have thought about more often than almost anything else in my career. She said, "The second encoded signal, the Aren frigate. Do you have their position?" I told her we did, and gave her the reconstructed vector and the status report from the Kethis Watch 4. She was quiet again, longer this time. Then, 9 days for Aren compact response. At minimum, I confirmed, if dispatch was immediate and their hull integrity is uncertain. The structural compromise report was embedded in the distress encoding. We cannot assess severity from the signal alone. Another silence. On my display, the Hadlow's deceleration curve was settling toward an intercept with our position. The Kessenveld's position, I should say, since we had begun to hold position to coordinate with the drifting transport. Varanth Crossing, Lieutenant Commander Vance said. The Aren frigate is not in your system's alliance structure. Am I correct? You are correct. The Aren Compact and the Veth systems maintain a trade relationship, but not a mutual defense arrangement. They didn't send their signal to you. The signal was sent to Aren Compact Patrol Command and reached us only through the Fold's interference. Same as us. Yes, I said. Same as you. A pause then. All right, we'll come to you first. The Kessenveld situation is more immediately accessible, but I want your propagation data on the Kethis Watch 4's position. We'll assess from there. I sent the data. The Hadlow reached us 4 hours later. I was still at my station when she came into visual range, and I will admit that I moved the display to the secondary screen so I could watch. I had seen human vessels in archive footage and in diplomatic exchange imagery, but I had never seen one in person, which I recognize is a strange gap for someone who had spent 11 years in the deep transit lanes. Human vessels were not common in this region. There was no particular reason they would be. The Hadlow was smaller than I had expected from the mass signature. A lean configuration, functional without being elegant, with the particular look of a ship that had been designed for long-duration operation and had the accumulated character of several years of exactly that. Her hull was marked with her service identifier, and what I later learned was the emblem of Earth's Outer Cartographic Service, a circle with radial lines extending outward in all directions, struck me as an appropriate symbol for an organization whose primary work was looking at things. She carried a modest weapons configuration, as our active scan confirmed. A pair of point defense arrays and what appeared to be a single short-range combat package that looked more like a turret than an offensive system. She was, as I had assessed from the emission profile, not a warship. She was also, I noted, flying the emergency response marking lights along her forward hull, the human convention for a vessel arriving to assist, rather than arriving for, any other purpose. I had not known to expect that. I found it, for reasons I could not immediately articulate, unexpectedly reassuring. The voice of her docking approach officer came over the channel with the cadence of someone who had done this particular task many times before. Professional, unhurried, slightly clipped in the way that people who work in proximity to controlled risk tend to speak. They confirmed approach vectors. They requested our hull breach coordinates. They asked for a patient count. I handled the channel. I gave them what they asked for. The patient count from the Kessenfeld was 43. Colonists and crew, who had been in sections adjacent to the drive manifold failure and had suffered various grades of atmosphere exposure and thermal injury. Nothing immediately life-threatening, the Kessenfeld's medical officer had reported, but several cases that needed intervention beyond what the transport's medical bay could provide. 43. The Hadlow's approach officer confirmed. We have a medical officer and 2 trauma technicians. We can take 8 critical cases aboard directly. The remainder we can stabilize with the field kit, if your medical bay can manage the workspace. Our medical bay has capacity, I confirmed. Good. We'll need a transfer lock on your port side that can accommodate a stretcher frame. Do you have that? We did, I confirmed it. All right, she said, with the particular tone of a person moving from the planning phase to the execution phase. Stand by for approach, I stood by. I did not leave my station during the next several hours, because my station was where I needed to be. But I had the display feeds, and I watched what I could. The Hadlow's docking approach was precise and quiet. No wasted movement, no flourish. Cheln, her medical team came aboard through the transfer lock within 11 minutes of hard dock, which I later learned was a standard they maintained as a point of professional pride. I saw them on the internal corridor feed, 3 humans in marked medical coveralls, moving with the brisk economy of people who had trained for this specific sequence many times. The medical officer, a tall individual with close-cropped gray hair whom I later learned was named Davin Orek, a coincidence of name that I found briefly disorienting, was already reviewing the patient files on a handheld unit before she had cleared the docking seal. The 2 technicians flanking her moved the way people move when they have long since stopped thinking about the individual steps and simply executing the shape of a practiced sequence. One carried a field kit the size of a storage locker and handled it as though it were considerably lighter than it looked. The other was already scanning the corridor layout, planning the geometry of the work before the work had begun. They neither hurried nor delayed. They were calibrated. That is the only word I have for it. Senior Operator Vethar Dunn came to stand near my station. He watched the feed with me for a few minutes without speaking. Then he said very quietly, "They're good." "Yes," I said. "They didn't have to come." "No," I said. "They didn't." He was quiet for another moment. "The Aren frigate. The lieutenant commander has the propagation data. The Aren are not going to know how to feel about this." I had been thinking the same thing, with the specific discomfort of someone who can see the shape of a problem clearly and has no authority to solve it. The Kethis Watch 4 had sent their distress call to their own people through their own channels. Their own people were, as of this moment, presumably in the process of dispatching a response through normal Aren compact procedures. No one had asked Earth's outer cartographic service to involve themselves. No one had asked a human survey corvette to receive an Aren distress signal through a gravitational anomaly, assess it, and then have an opinion about whether to do something. And yet here we were. "The lieutenant commander said she would assess," I said. "From one ship," Vethar said. "Yes, from one ship." He looked at the feed for another moment, the Hadlow's medical team moving through our corridors with quiet competence. And then he went back to his station without saying anything else. There was nothing useful to add. We were both watching the same thing, and we were both thinking the same thought, and neither of us had a word for it that was adequate to the situation. Some things settle into silence, because silence is the only container that fits them. I watched the medical feeds and kept my log current and waited. Approximately 3 hours into the medical operation, with 6 of the 8 critical Kessenfeld patients stabilized, and the field kit work on the remaining 37 well underway, I received a channel request from the Hadlow's bridge. Not the approach officer this time. Lieutenant Commander Vance herself, she said. Sector Keeper Davinos. Yes, Commander. I've been looking at the Kithis Watch 4's position against our fuel state and our current obligation. Here, I want to be transparent with you about the math. I waited. If we detach from your position now, once the critical cases are stabilized, say 4 more hours, we can reach the Kithis Watch 4's reconstructed position in approximately 31 hours. That is within our drive endurance with a manageable fuel reserve. The Aran Compact's own response is 9 days minimum. If the Kithis Watch 4's hull integrity holds for 11 days and no complications arise, their people are fine either way. She paused. If it doesn't hold, or if the structural damage is worse than the signal indicated, the margin narrows. You're going, I said. It was not quite a statement and not quite a question. I'm telling you the math, she said. The decision involves your propagation data, which you gave us in good faith, and an Aran vessel that neither of us has any formal obligation to. I wanted you to know what we're considering. I thought about what to say. I am a communications officer. I choose words for a living. I still had to think for a moment. Kithis Watch 4's crew did not send their signal to us, I said. They sent it to their own people. I know, she said. They may not want your assistance. The Aran Compact has protocols. A foreign vessel arriving at a distressed Aran patrol frigate without authorization could be complicated, she said. Yes, I've thought about that, but you're going. A pause. My signals officer picked up a secondary status code in the Kithis Watch 4's burst that didn't make it into your merged signal. It was in a frequency layer that the fusion only partially captured. It indicated that at the time of transmission, frigate had suffered casualties in the structural compromise event, not minor injuries. Casualties. I sat with that. So the crew count is reduced, I said. Life support duration extends. Yes. But, she said, and there was something careful in her voice. Carefulness of a person being precise about an unpleasant thing. A structural compromise that causes casualties in the initial event is not a stable situation. It tends to develop. The hull is still failing. That would be my reading of the signal. Yes. I looked at my station. Propagation data I had assembled at the reconstructed position vector for an Aran patrol frigate that was 2 light days away in a region I had never been to, crewed by people I had never met, who had not asked me for anything and had not asked this ship commander for anything, either. Commander Vance, I said, still here. I am a secondary communications officer on a resupply vessel. I have no authority to sanction, coordinate, or formally endorse any action your vessel takes. I know that, she said, with the mildest hint of something that I thought might be dry acknowledgement. I also have no authority to request that you not go. Also true. So I suppose what I am doing, I said, is telling you that I have reviewed your propagation math and I believe it to be accurate. And that I will include in my log a complete record of this conversation, including your stated reasoning, in case it is relevant to any subsequent proceedings involving your service command, the Aran Compact, anyone else who develops an opinion about what happened here. A pause. That is a very thorough thing to do. I am a very thorough communications officer, I said. There was a moment of quiet that had a slightly different quality than the silences earlier, in the day. Then she said, until the last critical case is stable. 4 hours, then we go. Understood, I said. I will continue watching the band. Appreciated, she said, and closed the channel. I did not sleep during those 4 hours. I am not sure I could have. I watched the medical feeds, which showed quiet work, careful hands, appropriate instruments, the specific unhurried precision of people, trained to function well under conditions that are not pleasant. Davan Orek worked without any visible awareness of being watched, which is either a professional skill or a personal quality, and I could not tell which from a corridor feed. Her 2 technicians moved in the particular synchronization of people who had worked together long, enough that they did not need to speak much. On one of the feeds, I could see our own medical staff working alongside the Hadlow's team. This was something I had not expected. That the integration would be so immediate, that our people and their people would simply be working the same problem in the same space without ceremony or protocol negotiation. Our medical officer, a careful individual named Savar Ethan, who had 20 years of transit lane medicine behind him, had apparently assessed the Hadlow's team within the first 20 minutes and organized a division of labor that used everyone's capabilities without redundancy. He told me later, when I asked him about it, that it had been the easiest coordination he had ever managed with an unfamiliar team. They were not trying to be in charge, he said. They were just trying to finish the work. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The 8th critical patient was stable at 3 hours and 42 minutes. 18 minutes ahead of the commander's estimate. The Hadlow's medical team was back aboard their ship, and hard dock was released at 4 hours and 9 minutes. Before they detached, Lieutenant Commander Vance sent a brief text channel note to Captain Solon. I received it because it came through my array. I logged it, as I logged everything, and I am going to reproduce it here because it seems relevant, and because it is short. It said, Kessenveld's 43 patients are stable or improving. Your medical team is good. We're going to check on the Aran frigate. We don't know what we'll find. We've flagged our course to the Aran Compact's nearest relay station. It seemed polite. Captain Solon sent back 2 words. I logged those too. The 2 words were, go well. I watched the Hadlow's drive signature on the long-range passive scan until she was out of readable range. It took approximately 90 minutes. It is a long time to watch a receding light on a readout, but I watched all of it. I don't entirely know why. Possibly because I had spent 11 years watching frequencies that nothing interesting ever used, and this seemed like a thing worth watching until it was gone. Vethar Dunn stopped by my station once during that time and said nothing. Just looked at the display with me for a few minutes, and then went back to his work. He was the kind of person who expressed a great deal through silence, and what he expressed in that particular silence was the same thing I was feeling. That something had happened here that we had not expected and could not entirely name, and that watching the drive signature until it faded was, under the circumstances, the most honest response available to us. Kessenveld was taken in tow by a waystation response tug 17 hours later. All 43 patients were transferred to the waystation's medical facility. 3 were kept for extended observation. The rest were released within 48 hours. None died. In the hours between the Hadlow's departure and the tug's arrival, the Varanth crossing held her position in the transit lane at reduced drive, running companionship watch on the drifting Kessenveld. It is standard procedure for a vessel with maneuvering capability to stay alongside a disabled ship until official assistance arrives. You keep your long-range scan active, you maintain a voice channel, so the crew of the disabled vessel does not feel alone in the dark, and you log everything in precise intervals so the record is clean for whoever follows. This was routine work. I had trained for it. But I remember that watch distinctly, because it was very quiet, and because the quiet gave me time to think about the previous 18 hours in a way that a busy watch does not. I thought about the sequence of events, the fold bending 2 signals into a collision, the collision producing a frequency that happened to match a human reception band, a single human survey ship happening to be within the amplified propagation radius. The physics of this were improbable to a degree that I had already begun calculating in the back of my mind and would later present to the tribunal as a rough order of magnitude estimate. The chance of those conditions aligning precisely enough to produce a receivable composite signal on a human band was the kind of number that, when you write it, requires more zeros after the decimal point than the notation feels comfortable accommodating. And yet the Kessenveld's 43 patients were stable. And yet, a human medical officer I had never met had worked alongside our own surgeon without ceremony or delay. And yet a survey corvette was currently burning hard for the outer patrol boundary to check on a frigate crewed by people who had never once considered that Earth might hear their emergency. The Kessenveld's communications officer, a young individual named Tereth Voss, who had been running on 2 hours of sleep, and the particular focus of someone who has just experienced something they will be processing for years, sent me a text channel message at some point during that watch. It said simply, I saw them come aboard on the internal feed. Who are they? I wrote back, Earth's Outer Cartographic Service, survey vessel. They were in range. He sent back, in range of what? We didn't aim anything at them. I thought about how to answer that for a while. Then I wrote, The fold did. He didn't respond after that. I think he was as occupied as I was with the not quite answerable quality of the fact. We filed our full propagation report with the sector authority, with the VETH Systems Relay Command, and Captain Solin's decision, which I thought was the correct one, with the Aran Compact Patrol Command. We attached the complete signal record, including the secondary status code that Lieutenant Commander Vance had mentioned, the one that had indicated casualties aboard the Kethis Watch 4 at the time of transmission. The Aran Compact, to their credit, read the full report within 2 hours of receiving it. They sent back an acknowledgement and a route query for the Hadlow's position. I noted that in the log. I found out what happened at the Kethis Watch 4 11 days later, through the Sector Authority relay feed. Not supposed to be monitoring that specific feed during my off-watch period, but I was a secondary communications officer, and I had developed, over 11 years, some productive habits regarding my monitoring scope. The Hadlow had reached the Kethis Watch 4 at 29 hours after departure from our position, 2 hours ahead of the commander's estimate, which I suspected was not an accident. The frigate's structural compromise had, as Vance had assessed, continued to develop. By the time the Hadlow arrived, 2 of the frigate's 3 compartmentalized hull sections had experienced secondary failures, and the crew of 41, reduced by 7 casualties in the initial event, had been compressing into the remaining section with functional life support. The Hadlow's engineering team had spent 19 hours stabilizing the intact section with external bracing equipment, is a technical capability I would not have assumed a survey corvette carried. Apparently, the Outer Cartographic Service equips its vessels for contingency work in unserviced regions. Found this detail significant in a way I had some difficulty articulating. A survey vessel, equipped for exactly this kind of work. Not because anyone had anticipated this specific situation, but because the people who built and supplied that ship had understood that their crews would operate far from help, and that the list of things they might need to do would be longer than any specific mandate could enumerate. Is a philosophy embedded in an equipment manifest. I had never thought about that before. I thought about it now. I have thought about it many times since. The people who stocked the Hadlow's engineering, holed with structural bracing gear, had never heard of the Kethis Watch 4. They had never heard of the Kethis Fold. They had simply decided that a ship operating in uncharted regions should be able to do more than observe, and then they had followed that decision to its inventory conclusions. And the inventory conclusions were now the reason 34 Aran crew members were alive. When the Aran Compact's own response vessel arrived on day 8, a day ahead of the original estimate, which I also noted, they found 34 surviving crew members in stable condition aboard a frigate that was, according to the Compact's own incident report, no longer capable of surviving 9 more days without intervention. The Hadlow had already departed by the time the Compact's vessel arrived. She left a brief message for the Aran response crew, logged on a standard relay frequency. I read it in the Sector Authority feed. It said, "Structural bracing is temporary. Recommend full tow to a repair facility. Crew is stable. Medical notes attached. Safe travels." No identification of her service command. No record of what authority she had acted under. No request for acknowledgement, gratitude, or reciprocation. Just safe travels. I thought about that for a long time. I am still thinking about it, to be precise. The tribunal, when I gave my testimony, asked me several questions about the nature of the misrouted signal and the fold's propagation behavior. And then one question that I found more interesting than the technical ones. One of the adjudicators, a senior woman whose name I will not include without her permission, leaned forward slightly and asked me what I had made of the Hadlow's commander. I said. She received a signal that was not meant for her. She responded to it anyway. She assessed the mathematics of the second emergency clearly and honestly and told me her reasoning before she acted. She kept records. She notified the relevant parties. She left before anyone could formalize a debt. The adjudicator waited, in the way that people wait when they think you are going to say more. I have spent 11 years, I said, listening to frequencies that nobody interesting uses. I have logged a very large number of unremarkable things. What I logged that day was not unremarkable, But the part I keep returning to is not the signal propagation, or the fold's behavior, or even the medical outcome. What part? The adjudicator said. When I asked Commander Vance why she came, why a survey corvette on a cartographic run altered course for an emergency that was not her species' emergencies, in a region that was not her territory, ships she had no obligation to, she said, "You were on the frequency. We were on the route." The adjudicator looked at me. "That's all," she said. Confirmed. "You were on the frequency. We were on the route." I paused. I have been a communications officer for 11 years. I understand what a frequency is. I understand what a route is. I am not sure I understand, even now, those two sentences mean as a complete explanation for what she did. "Perhaps," the adjudicator said, "it is not an explanation." "No," I said. "I don't think it is." She made a note on her stylus recorder. Then she said, "What is it then?" I thought about that for a moment. I said, "it is a description of how they are oriented. Not why they did it. How they move through space. They considered to be implied by proximity." I looked at my hands. They were on the frequency. They were on the route. In their framework, that may be sufficient reason. Not a justification, not a calculation. Just those are the conditions, and these are the things you do when those conditions obtain. The adjudicator was quiet for longer this time. Outside the tribunal chamber there was the ordinary noise of a busy way station, cargo handling, foot traffic, the low hum of environmental systems that never stops. Inside it was very still. "There is a follow-up question implied by what you've said," she said eventually. "Yes," I said, "there is. You don't intend to answer it." "It's not a question I can answer. I can tell you what I observed. I can't tell you what it means that they are made that way." I paused. "I'm not sure anyone can. I think it is one of those facts about the galaxy that has to be carried rather than resolved." She considered that. Then, she wrote something on her recorder and closed the session. My daughter, when I told her this story the night before she left for the academy, listened without interrupting, which is unusual for her. She has her mother's impatience with slow narrative, normally, but she listened to all of it. And when I finished, she sat for a moment with the look of someone organizing a large amount of new information. Then she said, "Do you think Commander Vance knew what she was doing? To us, I mean. What it would mean to us to see that." I thought about it. "I don't know," I said. "I think she knew what she was doing in the operational sense. She assessed a situation and acted on it. I'm less certain she was thinking about what it would mean to observe. I think she was thinking about frequency and route, and the math on the Kethys. Watch 4's hull. I think the meaning was a secondary output." My daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That might be the point." I looked at her. "If she'd been thinking about what it would mean," she said, "she would have been thinking about us. And if she'd been thinking about us, she might have made a different calculation, about risk, about authority, about whether it was worth it." She paused. "But she was thinking about frequency and route and hull math, so she just went." I sat with that for a while. "That is," I said eventually, "a more sophisticated reading of the situation than I managed in 11 years of thinking about it." She shrugged with the particular modesty of a young person who has just said something accurate and knows it. "I'm going to study navigation," she said. "I think about routes." "You're going to study cartographic surveying," I said. She smiled. I did not ask whether she had chosen that discipline because of this story. I already knew the answer, and some things are better left as implications. The last thing I want to note, for the record, is this. The events I have described, the Veth Sector Authority received a formal communication from the Aran Compact Patrol Command. It was addressed to the Sector Authority Relay, to Captain Vareth Solon of the Varenth Crossing, and to the Outer Cartographic Service of Earth, care of the relay station nearest to the Kethys Fold transit lane. The communication was brief. It acknowledged the distress signal propagation event and the subsequent response by the survey corvette ECS Hadlow. It expressed the Aran Compact's thanks to Lieutenant Commander Vance and her crew for their actions at the Kethys Watch 4, and noted that the surviving crew of that vessel had expressed the same. Then it said, "Fleet," in the clipped procedural language of a military compact that was clearly working to be precise about something it found unfamiliar. "The compact has reviewed the circumstances of the Hadlow's response and finds no protocol violation As the HFY responded to a signal received under extraordinary propagation conditions and notified the compact's relay stations prior to action. The compact notes that the HFY arrived before the compact's own response vessel, and that the outcome for our crew was materially affected by her presence. We do not have a standard category for this occurrence. They did not have a standard category for this occurrence. I have thought about that line more than almost any other part of the whole affair. 11 years in the transit lanes, watching the bands that nobody interesting uses, and the most precisely accurate thing anyone said about what happened that day was an Aren compact, troll officer admitting, in formal written correspondence, that they did not have a standard category for a human survey corvette that received a signal it was never supposed to receive and came anyway. Neither do we. I am not sure we are supposed to. I think. And this is the thing I tried to explain to my daughter, the thing I wanted her to carry to the academy with her. I think some things in the galaxy remain in the category of no category, precisely because they are not systematic. They are not doctrine. They are not protocol. They are a consequence of a specific person, on a specific route, receiving a specific signal, and deciding that the math on the hull of a frigate they never expected to hear from was their problem now. That is a difficult thing to file. It is not a difficult thing to remember.